March 27, 2026, 6:14 a.m. Sevastopol, Crimea. 4 Russian warships are 4,200 nautical miles from home, docked in Bandar Abbas, Iran, posing for photographs. Back in Sevastopol, the harbor defense grid is running at 60% capacity. Key radar arrays have been redeployed. Patrol boat coverage has dropped from continuous rotation to 6-hour gaps. And inside dry dock number 3, a Kilo-class submarine sits exposed on blocks, its hull plating partially removed for maintenance. 8 Ukrainian maritime drones are already in the water. In less than 90 minutes, 3 of them will reach the dry dock entrance. The submarine will sustain structural damage that analysts will later assess requires 6 months to repair. The dry dock crane system will be destroyed, and Russian Naval Command will learn a lesson that no amount of propaganda footage from Iran can erase. You don't leave your harbor undefended. Ever. I'm your host at UkraineSignal, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're breaking down one of the most precisely timed naval strikes of the entire conflict, a strike that didn't require a single ship, didn't require a single aircraft, didn't even require a single sailor to leave Ukrainian-controlled territory. All it required was patience, intelligence, and 8 drones that cost less than a single Russian cruise missile. Real tactics, real consequences. UkraineSignal. Let's start where this operation actually began. Not in the water. Not at the drone launch point. It began in a conference room in Moscow 3 weeks before the strike. Early March 2026. Russian Navy leadership faced a dilemma. The United States had been steadily reinforcing its naval presence in the Persian Gulf following escalating tensions with Iran. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group was operating in the Gulf of Oman. A second carrier group was transiting the Suez Canal. Washington was sending signals. Tehran wanted signals of its own. Iranian naval commanders proposed joint exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, a demonstration of solidarity. Russia and Iran, shoulder to shoulder, showing the world they could challenge American naval dominance in the most strategically vital waterway on Earth. For the Kremlin, the appeal was obvious. International headlines, footage of Russian warships operating alongside Iranian vessels, a counter-narrative to the isolation Russia had faced since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The Ministry of Defense approved the deployment within days. The assets selected were the frigate Admiral Essen, the frigate Admiral Makarov, the frigate Admiral Grigorovich, and the corvette Vyshny Volochyok, all from the Black Sea Fleet. The Essen and Makarov were equipped with Kaliber cruise missile systems. The Grigorovich carried a mix of anti-ship and anti-submarine capabilities. The Vyshny Volochyok, a Bayan M-class corvette, was a smaller vessel but packed significant firepower for its size, with 8 Kaliber cells. 4 warships, pulled from the Black Sea at a time when the fleet was already operating at reduced strength. Which weapon system made the biggest difference in this operation? Was it the maritime drones, the intelligence network, or the timing itself? Drop your answer in the comments below. The transit alone was telling. To reach the Strait of Hormuz, the Russian flotilla had to pass through the Turkish Straits, cross the Mediterranean, transit the Suez Canal, navigate the Red Sea, and round the Arabian Peninsula. That's roughly 12 to 14 days of sailing. 12 to 14 days during which those 4 warships were unavailable for any Black Sea mission. Ukrainian military intelligence, the GUR, tracked every nautical mile. Satellite imagery confirmed the departure from Sevastopol on March 14th. Open-source intelligence analysts posted AIS tracking data showing the flotilla entering the Bosphorus on March 15th. By March 17th, the ships were in the eastern Mediterranean. By March 22nd, they had cleared the Suez Canal. And by March 25th, GUR analysts had completed their assessment. The window was open. Sevastopol's maritime defense architecture was not designed to lose 4 warships simultaneously. The Black Sea Fleet had already suffered catastrophic losses since 2022. The flagship Moskva sunk by Neptune anti-ship missiles in April 2022, multiple landing ships destroyed, patrol boats eliminated by Ukrainian naval drones in a series of strikes throughout 2023 and 2024 that rewrote the rules of naval warfare. By early 2026, the fleet's operational strength in the Black Sea was a fraction of its pre-war capability. The 4 ships sent to Iran represented a significant portion of what remained combat-ready. What stayed behind in Sevastopol was a skeleton force. 2 Tarantul-class missile corvettes, a handful of patrol boats, 1 improved Kilo-class submarine, Project 636.3, designated Rostov-on-Don, which was undergoing hull repairs in Dry Dock Number 3 after sustaining damage in a previous Ukrainian strike in September 2025. That submarine had been a priority target for months. It was one of the fleet's most capable undersea platforms, armed with Kaliber cruise missiles that had been used to strike Ukrainian cities. And now, it was sitting stationary, partially disassembled in a dry dock protected by a defense grid operating at reduced capacity. GUR identified 3 critical vulnerabilities. First, the coastal radar network. 2 of Sevastopol's primary maritime surveillance radars, mineral ME systems capable of detecting small surface targets at ranges exceeding 120 kilometers, had been partially redeployed. 1 had been moved to support operations near the Kerch Strait. The other had suffered damage from a Ukrainian missile strike in January 2026 and was undergoing repair. The remaining radar coverage had gaps. Specifically, the southern approach to Sevastopol harbor, passing along the coast near Cape Violent, had reduced detection reliability for low-profile surface targets. Second, the patrol boat rotation. With fewer vessels available, the harbor patrol schedule had shifted from continuous coverage to periodic sweeps. Intelligence indicated gaps of up to 6 hours between patrol boat circuits of the outer harbor approaches. 6 hours is an eternity when maritime drones can travel at speeds of up to 45 knots. Third, the shore-based weapon systems. Sevastopol's harbor was protected by a combination of AK-630 close-in weapon systems, heavy machine gun positions, and manually operated weapon stations. These were effective against detected targets. The operative word being detected. Without continuous radar coverage and with reduced patrol assets, detection would be delayed. And delayed detection against fast-moving maritime drones meant reduced engagement time. Stay with me. What happens over the next 90 minutes will cripple a submarine that was being prepared to launch Kaliber missiles at Ukrainian cities. The planning for the strike began within hours of the intelligence assessment being completed on March 25th. Ukrainian naval drone units, which had evolved from improvised operations in 2022 to a sophisticated branch of Ukraine's asymmetric warfare capability, had pre-positioned assets along the Crimean coastline weeks earlier. These weren't last-minute deployments. Ukraine's drone operators had been staging equipment at concealed launch points, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. The drone model used in this operation was an evolution of the designs that had already proven devastatingly effective against the Black Sea Fleet. Uncrewed surface vessels, roughly 5 to 6 meters in length, powered by marine jet engines, capable of speeds exceeding 40 knots and carrying warheads estimated between 200 and 350 kilograms of explosive. The exact specifications remain classified by Ukrainian military authorities, but open-source analysis of previous strikes and recovered debris has provided a general picture. 8 drones were allocated for the mission. The strike plan was elegant in its simplicity. The 8 drones would approach Sevastopol from 3 separate vectors. 2 drones, designated the decoy element, would approach from the northwest, along the coastline near Lyubimovka. Their mission was not to reach the harbor. Their mission was to be detected, to draw fire, to force whatever coastal defense assets were operational to orient toward the northwest, while the main strike package approached from the south and southwest. The remaining 6 drones were divided into 2 groups. Group Alpha, 3 drones, would approach from the southwest, rounding Cape Violent and entering the harbor approach from the direction with the weakest radar coverage. Group Bravo, 3 drones, would approach from the south, timing their arrival to coincide with Group Alpha, creating a converging attack that would overwhelm the defense grid's ability to prioritize targets. The target was Dry Dock Number 3. Specifically, the crane infrastructure servicing the dock, the support buildings housing maintenance equipment, and the submarine itself. March 27th, the operation launched at 4:40 a.m. local time. The drones entered the water at staggered intervals from 3 different launch points along the Crimean coastline. The distances to target varied between 60 and 85 kilometers depending on the approach route. At cruising speed, transit time would range from approximately 70 to 100 minutes. The decoy element launched first, 2 drones heading northwest toward Lyubimovka at moderate speed, roughly 30 knots, to extend their transit time and ensure they arrived at the detection zone at the right moment. They were not trying to be stealthy, they were trying to be obvious. Group Alpha launched 12 minutes later from a point south of Foros. 3 drones in a loose formation, maintaining low profiles, using the coastline's radar shadows where possible. Their route took them along the southern Crimean coast before turning north toward the harbor entrance. Group Bravo launched 8 minutes after Alpha from a different point further east. 3 more drones converging on the same target from a slightly different angle. The timing was calculated so that all 6 strike drones would arrive at the harbor entrance within a 4-minute window. For the next hour, 8 unmanned vessels moved through the darkness of the Black Sea. No crew, no cockpit. Just onboard navigation systems following pre-programmed waypoints, with operators monitoring via satellite link from a control station in Ukrainian-held territory, hundreds of kilometers away. At 5:48 a.m., the first phase activated. The 2 decoy drones reached the detection threshold northwest of Sevastopol. They accelerated to maximum speed. They made noise. They generated radar returns. They did everything a real attack force would do if approaching from that direction. The Russian response was immediate but predictable. The operational mineral ME radar oriented northwest. Shore defense positions along the northern harbor approach went to alert status. An AK-630 close-in weapon system trained its 6 barrels toward the incoming contacts. A patrol boat, one of only 2 available, turned to intercept. At 5:51 a.m., the first decoy drone was engaged. The AK-630 opened fire at a range of approximately 1,800 meters. The 6-barrel rotary cannon fired a burst of 30mm rounds. The drone was hit and destroyed. The second decoy, 400 meters behind, continued its approach for another 20 seconds before being engaged by machine gun fire from a shore position. It detonated on the surface, its warhead creating a plume of water and debris visible from the harbor. 2 drones eliminated, 2 threats neutralized. The harbor defense teams would have experienced a brief moment of relief. That relief lasted approximately 3 minutes. How many drones reached the dry dock area in this strike? Was it 2, 3, or 5? The answer comes at the end of this breakdown. At 5:54 a.m., Group Alpha rounded Cape Fiolant and entered the southern approach channel. 3 drones, low in the water, presenting radar cross-sections smaller than a fishing buoy. The gap in radar coverage that GUR had identified was real. The drones covered 3.2 kilometers of the approach without detection. The first detection came at 5:56 a.m., when a shore observation post south of the harbor visually spotted a wake on the water. The observer reported a surface contact, but the report went to a command post that was still processing the aftermath of the decoy attack from the northwest. Precious seconds were lost in the decision cycle. Was this a new attack? A false alarm? A piece of debris from the destroyed decoy drones drifting in the current? By the time the shore defense coordinator redirected attention to the southern approach, Group Alpha was 2.1 kilometers from the harbor entrance. Then Group Bravo arrived. At 5:57 a.m., 3 more drones appeared on radar from the south-southwest. The defense picture went from 1 unconfirmed contact to 4 confirmed incoming threats in under 60 seconds. The AK-630 that had engaged the decoys was still oriented northwest. The patrol boat was 2 kilometers out of position, having moved to investigate the decoy wreckage. The shore defense teams had weapons. They had ammunition. What they didn't have was time. The single operational mineral ME radar attempted to track all 4 visible contacts simultaneously. The system, designed to handle saturation attacks, was degraded. One of its tracking channels had been experiencing intermittent faults for weeks. A maintenance request had been submitted. It had not been fulfilled. The repair technicians had been reassigned. Subscribe to UkraineSignal if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what happened in the next 3 minutes is a masterclass in asymmetric naval doctrine. At 5:58 a.m., the shore defense battery south of the harbor opened fire on the lead drone of Group Alpha. Heavy machine guns, 12.7mm DSHK, fired in sustained bursts. The drone was hit. Its engine housing took multiple rounds. It began losing speed but continued forward on momentum. Its navigation system still functional, its warhead still armed. The second drone of Group Alpha passed the damaged lead drone. It accelerated to maximum attack speed, approximately 45 knots. At that speed, it covered the remaining distance to the harbor entrance in under 90 seconds. At 5:59 a.m., the first drone of Group Bravo reached engagement range. Shore gunners split fire between the two groups. An AK-630 finally reoriented to the southern threat axis. It engaged the lead Bravo drone at 1,200 meters. 40 rounds fired in a 2-second burst. The drone took hits to its forward hull section but did not detonate. Its warhead, positioned in the bow, was protected by the hull structure. The drone continued. At 6 a.m., the damaged Alpha lead drone, still moving at reduced speed, struck the outer breakwater structure. Its warhead detonated on impact. The explosion was significant, roughly equivalent to 250 kilograms of TNT, but it hit a concrete breakwater wall. Structural damage to the breakwater, no damage to the target. This drone had served its purpose, though. Not as a decoy, but as a distraction. Its detonation forced shore gunners to flinch, to look away, to momentarily lose their sight picture on the remaining drones. 6:01 a.m. Alpha 2 entered the harbor. The drone passed through the gap between the outer breakwater and the southern mole. Inside the harbor, the water was calmer. The drone's speed stabilized. Its navigation system switched to terminal guidance, following pre-programmed coordinates toward dry dock number 3. Alpha 3 was 15 seconds behind it. Bravo 1, despite the AK-630 hits, was still operational. It entered the harbor approach 30 seconds after Alpha 3. Inside the harbor, close-range defenses engaged. A machine gun position on the dock wall opened fire on Alpha 2. Tracers streaked across the dark water. Rounds impacted the drone's hull. The drone did not stop. At 45 knots, a 5-meter drone covers 23 meters per second. The gunner had perhaps 4 seconds of effective engagement time. He missed the warhead. At 6:02 a.m., Alpha 2 struck the service pier adjacent to dry dock number 3. The warhead detonated against the concrete pier structure, less than 40 meters from the exposed hull of the Kilo-class submarine Rostov-on-Don. The explosion sent a shockwave through the pier, cracking the concrete surface, destroying a fuel transfer station and showering the dry dock area with debris. The submarine's exposed hull plating, partially removed for maintenance, offered no protection. Fragmentation and blast overpressure impacted the port side of the hull, damaging external fittings, sonar housing components, and rupturing a ballast tank that had been opened for inspection. 15 seconds later, Alpha 3 reached the dry dock. This drone did not hit the pier. It entered the dry dock channel itself, navigating between the dock walls, and detonated directly against the dock's main crane pylon. The pylon, a steel structure supporting the gantry crane used to lift equipment and hull sections during submarine maintenance, buckled from the blast. The crane, a critical piece of infrastructure without which heavy maintenance operations were impossible, collapsed partially across the dock, its boom coming to rest against the submarine's sail structure. Bravo 1, the drone that had absorbed AK-630 fire and kept coming, reached the dock area 20 seconds after Alpha 3. Its navigation system, possibly damaged by the earlier hits, guided it into the support building, adjacent to the dry dock. The building housed electrical switching equipment, welding stations, and parts storage for the submarine maintenance operation. The 300-kilogram warhead detonated inside the structure. The building was gutted. 3 drones, 3 impacts. 90 seconds from the first harbor entry to the last detonation. Bravo 2 and Bravo 3 did not reach the target. Bravo 2 was engaged and destroyed by the reoriented AK-630 approximately 800 meters from the harbor entrance. Bravo 3 suffered a suspected navigation system failure, possibly caused by electronic jamming that Russian forces activated belatedly at 6:01 a.m. It deviated from its attack course and struck the outer harbor wall, detonating harmlessly against the stone structure. Of 8 drones launched, 2 served as decoys and were destroyed as planned. 3 reached the target area and detonated against critical infrastructure. 2 were destroyed by defensive fire. 1 malfunctioned, a 37.5% success rate on the strike element. In conventional military terms, that's an acceptable ratio. In asymmetric warfare terms, where the drones cost an estimated $250,000 each and the damage they inflicted will cost tens of millions to repair, it's a devastating return on investment. The total cost of the 8-drone package, including the decoys, was approximately $2 million. The damage inflicted on the Rostov-on-Don submarine, the dry dock crane, the service pier, and the maintenance facility was assessed by Western intelligence analysts at between $80 and $120 million. That's a cost-exchange ratio of roughly 1 to 50. If you believe tactics win wars, type UkraineSignal in the comments. because this operation is proof. Now let's talk about what happened after the explosions. The immediate aftermath inside Sevastopol harbor was chaotic. Fires burned at 3 separate points around dry dock number 3. The service pier fire, fueled by the destroyed fuel transfer station, sent a column of black smoke rising over the harbor that was visible from the city center. Emergency response teams were dispatched, but the damage to the electrical switching building meant that fire suppression systems in the dry dock area were inoperable. Firefighting had to be conducted manually. The submarine Rostov-on-Don was assessed within hours. The damage was not catastrophic in the sense that the hull was not breached below the waterline because the submarine was in dry dock and not in the water. But the damage was operationally devastating. The portside hull plating that had been removed for maintenance was destroyed. The sonar dome housing had sustained fragmentation damage. The partially collapsed crane made it impossible to continue maintenance operations without first clearing the wreckage, which itself required heavy lifting equipment that was now damaged. Ukrainian General Staff reports issued on March 28th confirmed the strike and claimed significant damage to harbor infrastructure. Satellite imagery analysis, published by commercial providers within 48 hours, showed the collapsed crane, the destroyed support building, and scorch marks across the dry dock area consistent with multiple detonations. Russian official statements were predictable. The Ministry of Defense claimed that all maritime drones were intercepted and that no significant damage was sustained. This claim was contradicted by the satellite imagery, by the visible smoke column that residents of Sevastopol had photographed and posted on social media before authorities could suppress the content, and by intercepted communications that Ukrainian intelligence released on March 30th. Those intercepted communications were revealing. In one exchange, a Russian naval officer at the Sevastopol base communicated with Black Sea Fleet headquarters in a tone that Ukrainian analysts described as barely controlled panic. The officer reported that the dry dock crane was completely non-functional and that submarine maintenance operations were suspended indefinitely. He requested immediate deployment of replacement radar equipment and additional shore defense assets. The response from fleet headquarters, according to the Ukrainian Intercept, was that no additional assets were available because, and this is the critical point, the assets were either deployed to Iran or committed to other operational requirements along the Crimean coast. The officer in Sevastopol was told to manage with existing resources. Those existing resources had just proven catastrophically insufficient. Let's pull back and examine the strategic picture, because this strike wasn't just about a submarine and a crane. It was about a decision made in Moscow that prioritized optics over operational security. The deployment of 4 warships to Iran was a political decision. It was made for cameras, for headlines, for the narrative that Russia remains a global naval power capable of projecting force alongside its allies far from home waters. And in purely political terms, it achieved its objective. Russian and Iranian state media broadcast footage of the joint exercises extensively. Naval vessels from both countries conducted formation sailing in the Strait of Hormuz. Officers exchanged pleasantries on deck. Flags flew. Speeches were made. But while those cameras were rolling in the Persian Gulf, Ukraine was dismantling Sevastopol's ability to maintain its last operational submarine. This is the fundamental tension that Russia has faced throughout this war. It wants to be seen as a global power. It wants to project force in the Middle East, in the Arctic, in the Pacific. But it is fighting a war in Ukraine that demands every available asset, every radar system, every patrol boat, every warship. Every time Moscow sends forces abroad for political theater, it creates a gap at home. And Ukraine has proven repeatedly that it will find those gaps and exploit them with ruthless precision. What would NATO have done differently in this situation? Could a different defense architecture have prevented the strike? Drop your analysis in the comments. The Rostov-on-Don submarine was not just any vessel. It was a Project 636.3 improved Kilo-class submarine, one of the quietest diesel-electric submarines in the world. NATO designated the class Improved Kilo and respected its capabilities. Each boat carries 4 533mm torpedo tubes and can launch Kaliber cruise missiles from its torpedo tubes using the Club S weapons system. A single Kilo-class submarine can carry up to 4 Caliber missiles, each with a range exceeding 1,500 kilometers. Those Kalibers had been used to strike Ukrainian cities, civilian infrastructure, power stations, residential buildings. The Rostov-on-Don had participated in multiple missile strikes against Ukraine since 2022. Removing it from operational capability, even temporarily, directly reduced Russia's ability to terrorize Ukrainian civilians. This is what separates Ukraine's targeting philosophy from Russia's. Russia uses cruise missiles against apartment buildings and hospitals. Ukraine uses $250,000 drones against military submarines and harbor infrastructure. The moral asymmetry is as stark as the tactical one. The repair timeline for the Rostov-on-Don was assessed by Western intelligence as a minimum of 6 months, and that estimate assumed that Russia could source replacement components for the damaged sonar housing and hull fittings. Under sanctions conditions, sourcing those components was itself a challenge. Some analysts suggested the submarine might not return to operational status for 9 months or longer. Others questioned whether Russia would even attempt the repair in Sevastopol, given the demonstrated vulnerability of the dry dock, or whether the submarine would need to be towed, a complex and risky operation, to a repair facility in Novorossiysk or even further to the Caspian region. The dry dock crane was equally significant. Without it, Sevastopol's ability to conduct heavy maintenance on any large vessel was effectively eliminated. Replacement of a gantry crane of that size is not a weeks-long process. It requires manufacturing, transport, installation, and calibration. Under wartime conditions, with supply chains disrupted and the facility itself a proven target, replacement could take the better part of a year. Ukraine didn't sink a submarine that day. It did something arguably more damaging. It destroyed the infrastructure needed to keep submarines operational. It attacked not just a vessel, but a capability. And capabilities, once lost, are far harder to replace than individual platforms. The drone operators who executed this strike deserve particular recognition. These individuals, whose identities remain classified for operational security, conducted the operation from a control station hundreds of kilometers from the target. They navigated 8 drones through open water and darkness, coordinated a multi-vector approach with precise timing, managed a decoy operation that successfully drew defensive fire, and guided 3 warheads into a harbor that, despite its reduced defenses, was still one of the most heavily fortified naval installations in the Black Sea. Each drone operator controlled their vessel through a combination of pre-programmed waypoints and real-time adjustments via satellite data link. The skill required to thread a 5-meter drone through a harbor entrance under fire at night while managing a data link with latency measured in seconds is extraordinary. These are the modern equivalents of torpedo boat commanders, except they risk no lives in the process. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. The maritime drone program, which began as an improvised response to Russian naval dominance, has become the most innovative asymmetric naval warfare capability in the world. No other nation has demonstrated this level of effectiveness with uncrewed surface vessels in actual combat. The lessons being drawn from Ukraine's operations are being studied at every naval war college on the planet. Real tactics, real consequences. UkraineSignal. Now, the answer to our earlier question: how many drones reached the dry dock area? The answer is 3. Alpha 2 struck the service pier. Alpha 3 struck the crane pylon. Bravo. 1 struck the maintenance building. 3 out of 6 strike drones reaching their target area, with 3 detonations causing an estimated $80 to $120 million in damage. Total drone package cost, approximately $2 million. Let's close with the lessons. First, political deployments have operational costs. Every warship sent abroad for a photo opportunity is a warship not defending its home port. Moscow's desire to appear as a global power directly undermined its ability to protect its most critical naval facility in the Black Sea. This is not a new lesson. Navies have learned this repeatedly throughout history, but Russia, apparently, needed to learn it again. Second, asymmetric warfare continues to redefine naval combat. A submarine worth hundreds of millions of dollars, protected by shore defenses, radar systems, and patrol boats, was effectively neutralized by drones costing a fraction of a single torpedo. The cost-exchange ratio in this conflict continues to favor Ukraine, and it continues to challenge every assumption about how naval power should be structured and defended. Third, infrastructure is as important as platforms. Destroying a crane and a maintenance building doesn't make headlines the way sinking a warship does, but it achieves the same strategic effect. A submarine that can't be repaired is a submarine that can't fight. Ukraine understood this and targeted accordingly. The sophistication of that targeting philosophy, hitting the enablers rather than just the platforms, reflects a level of strategic maturity that many larger militaries have not achieved. Fourth, deception remains the oldest and most effective tactic in warfare. 2 decoy drones deliberately sacrificed to draw defensive attention northwest while the real attack came from the south. It's the same principle that has won battles for thousands of years. Feint in one direction, strike in another. The Russian defenders fell for it because human psychology hasn't changed, even if the weapons have. Fifth, reduced readiness kills. The radar gaps, the patrol boat shortages, the unmaintained equipment, the reassigned technicians. None of these individually would have been decisive. Together, they created a defense posture that was fatally inadequate. Readiness is not glamorous. It doesn't make for good propaganda footage, but it is the difference between intercepting a drone at 5 kilometers and detecting it at 2. Was the Russian decision to send warships to Iran a strategic miscalculation, or was Moscow simply willing to accept the risk? Could the shore defenses have stopped all 6 strike drones if the radar systems had been fully operational? What would you have done differently as the Ukrainian drone commander? Subscribe to UkraineSignal, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Sevastopol harbor is quieter now. The fires are out. The smoke has cleared. But the crane still lies across the dry dock, a tangle of steel resting against the damaged hull of a submarine that won't sail for months. The scorched concrete of the service pier is cracked and blackened. The maintenance building is a hollow shell. And somewhere in the Persian Gulf, 4 Russian warships are still conducting formation sailing with Iranian frigates, still posing for cameras, still projecting power they no longer have. The wrecks remain, silent reminders that modern warfare punishes every gap, every miscalculation, every moment of misplaced confidence. Without mercy, without exception, stay vigilant.